My son said, "You should stay somewhere else while we renovate." When I returned, my name was off the $33.00 property. So I called the real owner, me. "You should go live in a museum, Nana. Your decades of dust don't match our future. This house needs breathing space, not stale memories." Her words echoed in the hallway like an accusation, tone slick with disdain, practically dripping contempt. I carried the weight of that insult with me every step I took that morning. As they closed the door behind me, the lock clicking shut on more than just the entryway, it felt like the final breath of a life I had built with my own hands. In those final moments before I was ushered away, I stood in the kitchen, the room infused with everything we had ever known. The same room where I prepared coffee for my husband, who passed 10 years ago. The one where I had spooned oatmeal into a toddler's hands when Brandon was learning to walk. Now, everything was already being cleared out, my china being packed like relics, my photographs being bundled as optional nostalgia. Chelsea hovered near the doorway, handbag glinting, as if she were just one purchase away from starting over. I choked back tears of fury and grief until they formed a single, stubborn bead on my cheek. When they brought me to that so-called senior living community, I was too numb to register how clinical and impersonal it felt. The pale walls, the carousel of nursing staff who did not know me, the fluffy chair that pinched at my spine, all of it underscored just how thoroughly they had excised me from the home I paid for, lived in, and loved. Everything had been altered while I was gone. Locks changed, mail forwarded, my name subtly erased from the mailbox, the sign on the lawn replaced with "Renovation in Progress." It made no sense. Not until I remembered the old family chapel standing in a corner of the property. Long before the house rose into something worth millions, it was a modestly restored wooden chapel where my husband and I said our vows on a rainy afternoon 25 years ago. It had been our first home together. Years later, when real estate developers offered a fortune for that little plot to turn it into a spa resort, I had refused outright. "That chapel is at the heart of our family story," I told them then. I would not erase our past for profit. I had seen the contempt in Brandon's eyes when I said it. He accused me of putting prayer above prosperity. "You'd rather live with ghosts than invest in our image," he spat, words sharper than any blade. Now I understood better what that meant. They wanted shiny surfaces, curated family smiles, and no shadows. They had pink-washed our reality in a selfie filter called destruction. Somewhere in the shuffle, I retrieved my purse from the bedroom before they could take it. I held on to it because inside was the one thing they could never replace, the original deed to this home, the mortgage papers, decades of tax receipts I had kept tucked behind the framed wedding portrait. I doubted they believed it when I said I had always paid the property's taxes and maintenance since Edgar passed, to preserve the house, not mortgage it. Brandon believed he had been doing me a favor by helping out financially, but every check I wrote had been out of my savings. I'll admit I was furious. It was a cold, quiet fury that rises in your chest when you realize someone has stolen not just your home, but your dignity. I remember sitting at the edge of my bed in that sterile room, the curtain rattling like broken promises in the draft. I thought back to that image, a small wooden chapel, rain pattering on its stained glass window. Edgar singing off-key as he read our vows. I remembered how his voice cracked. "You built our family with more than bricks." I hugged the deed to my chest and whispered, "I remember." Brandon and Chelsea must each have made hundreds of decisions in my absence. Decor choices, contractor calls, furniture selections. All in the name of improving the family estate, they said. But they had rewritten the script entirely. Even the author had been erased, until I made one phone call. The voice on the other end belonged to Jasmine Cole, the law school friend who never forgot the woman who really taught her how to write briefs. As soon as I spoke, she was already convening on my behalf, calling title companies, arranging for a paralegal to file paperwork, sending certified letters. I didn't need a courtroom drama or confrontation. What I needed was to be acknowledged as the owner again, a legal acknowledgement, not an emotional confrontation. I asked Jasmine to wait, not because I lacked confidence, but because I wanted to feel something before I stood up again. It occurred to me that this story isn't just about a home. It is about stripping away a lifetime of love, devotion, and identity. Being dismissed wasn't the tragic part. Staying silent and letting them erase you would have been the tragedy. So, I waited, quietly. I suppose my family expected me to beg, or to crumble visibly on TV, or to issue a weepy statement about losing them. Instead, when the notice finally arrived, certified letter in hand, I called them. I did not publicly mock them. I did not call the press. I simply said, "I'd like the locks changed back to what they were, please, and any mail forwarded here." I did not sound bitter. I did not need to. The deed, the checks, the tax records, they spoke for me. They were speechless. I see now that this was never about litigation or restitution. This day belonged to me because I held the unspoken power that they had never considered. They had erased my name, but not my existence. And with one quiet phone call, I reclaimed that house. Brick, story, and shadow. I walk through the rooms now. They smell different. Empty first, maybe. But every step reclaims one memory. That kitchen island where I taught a sobbing teenager how to outrank his father in math. That living room where Edgar and I used to sit and plan our retirement. That stairwell I painted myself just after Brandon went to college, in a fit of optimism. My name is across the mailbox again. My footsteps echo in a house stitched with decades of moments. And though its windows face a new masoned facade, the soul of this home, my soul, is still walking through its halls, confident and unafraid. I stared at the stained check slips spread across the bedspread, as though they held the truth of my life inside their faded ink. I realized then, with a jolt, that for decades I had been silently paying the taxes on this house, the insurance premiums, the landscaping, the repairs after every monsoon rain. In the eyes of Brandon and Chelsea, I had been a guest, a nostalgic nuisance they reluctantly tolerated. That revelation, a burning sense of betrayal, pulsed through me like a shockwave. Their celebration of taking over was built on the very sacrifices they had misjudged. When I first glimpsed the yellowed receipts, I scanned the dates. 2005, 2010, 2014, every year after Edgar passed. Tax statements, roofing contractor invoices, annual insurance payments. My contributions were consistent and heavy. I remembered times when Brandon had told me casually over dinner, "Mom, you don't need to pay that, just let me cover it. After all, I'm the one running the estate now." I nodded quietly, not mentioning how I had already done so, in full, without his knowledge. I pretended not to mind, as if a mother could never be the quiet financial backbone of a legacy, only to be erased. I spent an entire afternoon in that bed, turning over memory after memory. The shingles Edgar and I replaced together when water dripped through the ceiling. The winter nights we spent wrapped in sweaters, hunched over ledgers, trying to balance school fees with mortgage. I remembered sending Brandon off to college, financing the last tuition payment, masking it under tuition assistance. I had buried my own plans in favor of his future. He had grown up believing he was providing for me. I ached at the thought. Then came the realization that this wasn't merely bookkeeping. It was a dramatic role reversal I never consented to. I stood too long at the window of that pale room and prayed for clarity, for silence to sharpen my resolve instead of drowning me. The next morning I got dressed with purpose. I asked a nurse to find me a private office or study so I could speak on the phone without interruption. Jasmine answered when I called, and I spoke slowly, deliberately. "I will be sending you a packet. All my deposits into the house account, the old checks, the closed ledgers, everything. Do not lose a single paper." She was immediate and efficient, exactly what I needed. That afternoon I sat at a small desk with folders in hand, each containing a decade's worth of proof. Brandon had believed he was the steward of my legacy, but I realized I had been its silent steward all along. He had taken over everything, decor, design, narrative, but I held the true title, provider. I arranged the packets in chronological order. First came the deeds and mortgage payoff from 1999, then the tax receipts, blue envelopes marked Roof Repair 2008, a fluorescent yellow paper labeled Cedar Tree Removal 2016. These were not just expenses, they were the threads of our history. It felt like reclaiming a voice after years of silence. Jasmine called back before I even closed the last folder. She mapped out her plan. Present the financial records to title companies, issue formal notices reclaiming rights, file for a corrective affidavit with the county recorder. The calm precision in her voice was both comforting and thrilling. Days later, I received a packet in return, the original deed, newly stamped with my name, not just as an occupant, but as a verified owner. I held it in my hands and took a long breath. I felt kinship with every woman who stood up for herself, not just because she had the right to, but because staying silent would have meant erasing her own life. Word spread quietly. A blurred headline popped up online. Elderly woman who paid decades of home taxes reclaims ownership. I did not seek fame, but I allowed the deed to speak, the evidence to breathe justice. I returned to the home, keys in hand, and when I unlocked the front door, the house exhaled. It smelled the same, but now I stood inside as belonging, not victim. Walking room to room, I acknowledged my story. In the living room where Edgar coaxed me to dance, in the kitchen where I coaxed blessings over burnt pudding, in the hallway where Brandon once ran toward me full of childish dreams, and in each room I whispered a promise, "You are still mine." Brandon came home that evening expecting to show me fresh paint choices. I stood by the window as he cleared his throat, eyes asked without asking, "I hope you will listen to our ideas." I looked at him, memories flickering behind my eyes, and I said quietly, "I'm still paying for this house." He froze. The words, simple but powerful, pierced through decades of entitlement. "You paid nothing," I had said without yelling. "Everything you oversaw, I upheld." He turned and left the room, uncomprehending. It wasn't vengeance. It was a quiet, profound truth. I was the one who built. I wasn't a burden. I was the foundation. I spent the evening settling into a chair, one Edgar built, and imagined passing each check, each stamped envelope, to the beneficiaries of compassion. The elderly neighbor down the street who needed legal help, the retired teacher who kept books for my foundation, the widow whose home was lost in the last recession. Owning a house is not about bricks and shingles. It is about the lives built within its walls. I came to understand that preserving property is not the same as protecting people. I was never just a name on a title. I was a quiet sacrifice and a living testament. And now, no one would mistake whose foundation this home stood upon. I would not raise my voice. I did not need to. I slid the USB into the port of the ancient laptop Jasmine had retrieved. Its light flickered like a fragile heartbeat, and in that moment, everything I had suppressed for decades surged like a tide. The files populated the screen: the original deed, countless tax payment PDFs, scanned checks, invoices from roofers, letters from insurance agents. I had collected these over years, saving them neatly, waiting for the day I would need them. That day had come. Jasmine sat next to me, calm but eager. As the documents populated her secure cloud drive, I watched her move with precision, organizing them into folders by year, labeling each clearly. 2005 payment for roof repairs, 2008 insurance renewal, 2011 property tax receipts. She was building a fortress out of paper and pixels. I let it happen around me while I held my breath, feeling the invisible weight of history reclaim itself. I stood up and walked slowly from room to room. The hallway photograph of Edgar and me on our wedding day smiled down at me. I whispered, "We did this right, my love." I had never felt more defined. That night, I asked Jasmine to file everything with the county recorder's office, to send a certified title check request, and to issue a notice of intent to reclaim ownership. She tucked the USB into an envelope and sealed it with a sense of gravity. I shivered, not because I was cold, but because I recognized the gravity of what I was doing. I was about to not fight, but instead stand in unwavering assertion. The next morning, a letter landed on my doorstep. My name, Elaine Miller, appeared in bold on the certified mail. It read, "Title restored to rightful owner by order of equitable review." I held that letter in my hand and wept, not for victory, but because I had not had to yell to reclaim what was always mine. I made a quiet decision. I would return home that day. I dressed in the slacks I wore to court hearings long ago, the blouse Edgar once called my morning sky, and I went to get the old keys from my purse. My heart pounded as I approached the front porch. No one was there yet. I eased the deadbolt. It fit perfectly. I opened the door. The house exhaled. I felt it in the floorboards, in the soft hum of the central heater, in the lingering scent of lavender sachets I had tucked into drawers when editing filing papers late at night. I walked inside like I was remembering a lullaby. Brandon and Chelsea returned unpredictably that afternoon. They entered the foyer, rosy with paint fumes and fresh plaster, but the look in their eyes was sallow, uncertain. Before they spoke, I did. "It looks the same," I said gently, gesturing to the mantel, the worn rug by the window. "But everything has changed." Brandon's jaw tightened. "Mom, I thought we handled things." I held up the certified letter. Then I held up a printed summary Jasmine had prepared, every dollar I had spent, every page of evidence. Recorded in black and white. He blinked. Chelsea turned away, tears in her eyes when she reached that list. "Grandma, I'm sorry." I did not let my smile soften, not yet. Instead, I said quietly, "Let's talk tomorrow, when we can all listen." This was not an invitation to resume old dynamics. It was a turning point. I owned it. Not with drama, not with rage, but with possession. The home, once a symbol of their triumph, was still mine. That night, I slept in my old bedroom. I sank against the pillow and thought of the sacrifices I had made. Each check, each repair, each silent smile through years of helping. I remembered Edgar's last words to me that afternoon before he slipped away. Yours was the company, the courage. I pressed my hand to the cool wallpaper and whispered, "I am still the one who saved this house." The next morning, I stood in the foyer as Jasmine handed me the official title document, now red, embossed, utterly unassailable. That morning, the house felt like a rented place no more. It was resettling, and I felt potency in silence. They'd tried their best to crush me behind closed doors, but I refused to let silence become my prison. The morning after I reclaimed my legal authority over the house, I demanded Jasmine help me pursue one final act of transparency. We requested the center's internal cameras, the ones that watched over the rooms and hallways where I had lived when I wasn't locked out. I asked for them to be published, made public, every snippet to prove what had really happened. Chelsea had launched a rumor that I was neglecting the elders at that place, that I was cruel or uncompassionate. It was beneath contempt. But since she chose words as her weapon, I would let the truth be the shield. By evening, a floodgate of footage became public. I watched, breath-catching, as the videos populated, caretakers gently helping me stand, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear, tucking blankets across my knees when those nights grew cold. There were moments of me giggling when a volunteer brought freshly baked cookies, the kitchen helper offering tea and a smile. I wasn't the monster Chelsea painted. I was the person they relied on to know what blooming tea tastes like. Then it happened. One clip captured Chelsea hunched over. I only recognized the rug under her hands, the painting in the background, from a corner of the dining area. In her hand, a framed photograph of Edgar and me from decades ago. The one he took out on our 50th anniversary. She swung it and shattered the glass, yanking it until the wood frame cracked. Then she dropped the glass shards on the carpet, breathing hard, anger and self-righteousness flaring from her face. Someone off-camera gasped. The staff rushed in and patched things up. But even the camera caught her glint of triumph. She looked scarred. I looked shattered. But that footage? It shattered her facade. She stomped out as though pissed off by something deeper than memory. It was broadcast within hours. The caption under the clip, "Granddaughter smashes grandma's wedding photo in care facility." The internet blew up. Comments like, "Mourners are the root of compassion. Those who smash relics are the roots of regret. You don't carve someone's legacy so you can shine brighter. Elder abuse isn't only physical, it is choosing to erase, to rend." Chelsea's Instagram engagement crashed overnight, losing nearly 50,000 followers in a matter of hours. Brands began to drop collaboration deals. Hashtags like "Respect Your Roots" started trending. I did not ask for any of this, but I recognized justice when it arrived. There was a letter for me that arrived the next day, handwritten, spidery text from someone who had worked at the center decades ago, saying thanks for being the kind of human she expected in her final chapter. That note meant more than all the titles lawyers file. Brandon arrived in person next, face pale, trying to salvage control. He stood before me, guilt radiating like a fever. "Mom, I didn't know what she would do. I was trying to protect the house, to protect us." He swallowed. "I'm sorry." I looked at him. The circles under his eyes. the sanctimony stripped away. But I said nothing. For months I had shown restraint. Now I allowed silence to roar. I walked through the house, the living room where I once baked cookies for neighborhood kids, the study where Edgar and I planned retirements that never happened. I touched the mantel. The dust was gone. The picture frames stood unbroken. There I placed a fresh photo, one I took that morning, warm sunlight caressing my face. Under it, a tag, "The woman who stood by you even when you stained her walls." I left it there. Later, I sat with Jasmine on the porch as night fell. She asked, "Do you want a public apology?" I said no. They were never sorry for anything. But I let her notify the media that the footage was available if anyone wanted to see the actual truth, because in telling my story, I had to let everyone else's deception unravel. In time, I learned that Chelsea had been called into a boardroom meeting by several of her sponsors. They said she violated their brand of respect. She left the brand. She issued a statement. "I was wrong about my grandmother. I'm seeking help." Someone called it 3 lines of public remorse. I don't know if she meant it. But I do know the house now stands with my name, my legacy intact, and the truth broadcasted. I walked through the night in one final act of validation. I turned the thermostat down, lit a single candle in the dining room, and whispered into the flicker, "I may be old, I may be alone, but I have never burned doors behind me." The candle burned. Some flames take time. Some truths need to be unleashed to illuminate the darkness they endured. And that night my light burned for both things. I had always believed that a home is more than walls. It is whispers shared over unfinished tea, laughter echoing under the rafters, quiet forgiveness in creaky floorboards. So when the time came to pass the house to a worthy purpose, I wanted to close that chapter the way it opened, with light, with grace, with humanity. I decided on a dinner, nothing ornate, but worthy of sincerity. I invited the neighbors, the gardeners who had tended our lawn, the volunteer librarian from the center, and the aides who had cared for me with such tenderness. I included Chelsea and Brandon, though their acceptance was far from certain. I told Jasmine she could attend too. I instructed the staff to place mismatched floral centerpieces, wildflowers in simple mason jars, and set the table with my china, the same china that smoked hundreds of dinners across decades. The dining room smelled of roast chicken, rosemary, and fresh-cooked parsnip mash. Soft light from candles danced across framed wedding photographs, from our brisk autumn wedding in 1965 to the last anniversary my husband and I celebrated, with cake he burned and laughter that filled the ceiling. I watched as the village librarian, Diana, fogged from dementia, clutched the table edge and whispered, "Oh, Elaine, you taught me to read when my world was closing." And I caught a glimpse of the head gardener, a man with knees that cracked like old doors. He said, "Your rain garden saved our soil." Those silent acknowledgments were richer than any confrontation. Brandon arrived late, shoes stiff, eyes avoiding mine. Chelsea followed, still adjusting under the scrutiny of those they had tried so hard to impress. They sat across from me in seats that were once theirs to dismiss. I did not smile, yet I did not frown. Instead, I raised my glass when the laughter settled, as though signaling forgiveness, not conquest. I said, "I built this house with love. I sent checks for every roof patch, for every gutter filled with autumn wrath. I tucked notes into your backpack before college, hidden and unseen. But tonight, I give it to those who need a home, not to those who rejected its caretaker." No sobbing, no dramatic tears, just a room filled with people honored by grace, not spectacle. Chelsea's face crumbled. She whispered, I'm sorry, Grandma." It was small, barely audible, but real. Brenda, the volunteer librarian, clasped her hand and said, "You still have people who love you." I excused myself during dessert and walked through the halls, now quiet, but each footfall sang of memory regained. I regarded the staircase I'd laid the first tile on, the living room where Edgar taught me to dance when the world felt too steep. I slowed in the hallway, where the chapel door still smelled of old varnish and rain. This house was no longer mine alone. It belonged to all who had shared life within it. I returned just as the last candle flickered low. Brandon approached softly and asked, "Will you ever come back?" I looked at him. There was pain, bewilderment, longing in his voice. I did not immediately respond. Instead, I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders. "I will come back," I said quietly as the guests began to disperse, "but only when you treat home as a sanctuary and not a monument." I held that space, then glided past the women who stood quietly next to me, and they looked proud, and proud that I finally looked proud of myself. Later, when silence draped the house gently, I walked to the window and saw a fox dart across the lawn under moonlight. It lingered a moment, eyeing the flower beds I once planted. It seemed to approve. I sipped my tea and thought, perhaps that is home. Not who holds your deed, but who honors your spirit. At that moment, I realized the house now had new stories to tell, about kindness, about survivors, about a grandmother who once felt erased, but rose instead with quiet dignity. No more confrontation, no more keys turned in empty locks, just the gentle knowledge that love endures, even when doors close. I paused, realizing the story I'd just lived through wasn't just about bricks and locks. It was about being seen again. And starting tomorrow, silence would no longer be my erasure. I still remember the moment I signed the final papers to transfer ownership of the house. My hand shook slightly, not from regret, but because I understood the weight of what I was giving away. Not just bricks and beams, but decades of memory and love. I placed the deed in Jasmine's hands, letting it rest in someone who understood that letting go was not giving up. It was creating space for something more. On the morning of the ribbon cutting, the air felt crisp and hopeful. The lawns were freshly mowed. Children from the neighborhood summer reading program were already lined up with books in hand. A local choir sang a simple hymn that wove into the wind. I stood in the foyer that used to be mine, now reimagined as the Elaine Heritage Library and Community Center. It smelled like books and promise. Sunlight filtered through windows that reflected more than frames. It reflected a new purpose. I greeted neighbors with warm kisses on the cheek, and volunteers brought me cups of lemonade in mismatched mugs. There were faces I recognized. The retired teacher who once tutored young readers, the hospice nurse who helped me through a fever in winter, the gardener whose knees I once rubbed before she limped home at dusk. I realized I had created more than a building. I had made a home for hearts left out. When the ribbon was cut, applause felt like a wave, gentle, unstoppable. I mumbled some words into the microphone. This was my home. Now it belongs to the community, to books, to second chances. May it be a home for every wandering heart that crosses this threshold. Inside, shelves lined with books rose like sentinels. Community tables waited for hands that wanted to read, to write, to escape. A small reading nook with cushioned seats overlooked the old chapel lawn. I walked through it all, not as a widow of a legacy, but as founder of something new, a sanctuary. Then I saw her, that elderly woman I had met at the center before. She'd been rescued from loneliness when Elaine helped arrange friendly visits. Her hands shook as she adjusted her scarf, but her eyes were bright. She stepped inside, her recent steps heavy, but tenacity carried her forward. As she crossed the threshold, tears gathered in her eyes. She turned to me and whispered, "You gave me a place to be safe." Her voice cracked, but carried more truth than any speech. I nodded, unable to speak. That moment was not about me. It was about her, and all of us who never stopped wanting to belong. I think I smiled, but I was not aware of it. There were no cameras, no headlines, just that hush full of recognition. Kindness will outlast cruelty. Later, as volunteers straightened books and dust motes danced in afternoon light, I found a quiet corner by the old chapel window. It looked out across the green lawn where children sat reading aloud, and a small group gathered around a storytelling chair. The pages turned, and laughter mingled with wind and memory. I leaned back into a chair and watched a young mother help her child sound out words. I thought of Edgar's off-key humming. I thought of the time I patched the love seat's tear so our granddaughter could nap there. I thought of all the moments that I would have missed if I had given up on believing I still had something to give. Chelsea came in then, timid, holding her phone in her hand. She said softly, "Thank you." It wasn't a performance, it wasn't public, it was real. I offered her a seat, handed her a book, and she sank into the story, quiet recognition that stories can heal. I did not speak until the volunteers closed the library for the evening. Then I said, gently, Home isn't where you live, it's where you belong. I looked around at what had become of the house, not a monument of wealth, but a cradle of community. I walked out through the front doors in the warm dusk air. The sign above glowed faintly, Elaine Heritage Library and Community Center. People were still inside, reading, learning, belonging. I closed the doors behind me carefully, feeling no loss. I stepped onto the lawn and looked back one last time. My heart felt peace, not because I had won, but because I had given. The house would continue to tell stories, but now, not mine alone. A gentle breeze brushed my cheek. I closed my eyes and breathed, feeling not older, but fulfilled. I first heard the knock in the quiet of late afternoon, when the sunlight was soft and everything felt still. They came as I was folding laundry in the guest room, a room I hadn't slept in for long years, one I had kept just in case. My hands paused on a pillowcase embroidered with my mother's initials, and then, Knock, knock, knock. I recognized that hesitant rhythm, the staccato of regret. I knew without looking who it was. Brandon. I stood, took a deep breath, and walked to the front entrance of the Elaine Heritage Library and Community Center, the home I had given to many, but reclaimed in spirit myself. He stood on the porch, shoulders slumped, face ashen, no bravado, only remorse. In his hand, I saw a small bouquet, petals trembling, and moisture on his lashes. His gaze met mine from across the threshold, and he spoke. Voice cracked as though it sprang from the bottom of a well. "Mom, I was wrong. I'm sorry. I've been so blinded. Please, let me in." I watched him through the window, recognizing the corners of his grief, the same son who had erased me, who had rewritten our story. Yet he was no longer stepping forward with arrogance, but with collapse. After a long breath, I opened the door just a crack. I did not step back. I stayed firmly anchored. I looked into the eyes of a man who had tried to destroy my home, my reputation, my spirit. He held his breath, and I said softly, "No anger, only truth. Mercy does not mean letting betrayal inside." I turned and closed the door, not with force, but with the stillness of certainty. Inside, the hushed murmur of pages and whispers carried on around me. Outside, there was only brandished regret, fisted behind a fragile silhouette. It was not long before the moment was captured and streamed across local news. The CCTV footage ran everywhere. Son seeks forgiveness at elderly mother's community center. Her response, still no. Social media lit up with commentary. She said it plain, betrayal merits no gate. An entire generation called out with silence. You don't knock when you burn someone's bridge. Brendan was dragged from the porch by a volunteer, a quiet, trembling figure swept away by cameras, by mockery, by a silence that spoke louder than any sentence. Chelsea, meanwhile, spiraled in public humiliation. Her influencer empire collapsed. Sponsors pulled endorsements. Hashtags like Not Your Nana and Respect Your Roots trended. Her apology videos sounded rehearsed. Trust couldn't be bought with staged remorse. Inside the community center, nobody cheered or gasped. They carried on reading, sewing, and laughing quietly. I stood behind the counter and handed a young woman an overdue library book. She smiled at me and said simply, "Thank you for keeping your promise to us." That's what mattered. Night fell, and I locked the doors. As the last employee left, I stood alone in the dim light of the children's reading corner. The photo of Edgar and I was planted on a shelf behind soft cushions where someone's child might do their homework one evening. I pressed my fingers against it gently and thought, we are still here. You can't knock us down with silence. The world, my home, had shifted. No longer a monument to money or lineage, but a sanctuary of hearts held together by dignity. I had barely said a word, but what I said spoke more than I could have ever shouted. In the days that followed, Brandon's name was muted on social feeds, his presence erased from circles that once cheered him on. Meanwhile, someone handwritten a note and slipped it through my door. "Please don't be sad. I came to your center to read alone, and it made me want to be kinder." Nothing grand, not deserving of headlines, but the purest kind of grace I had ever received. I carried on, teaching an evening class about consumer rights, sitting quietly for tea with Diana, the dementia patient who once fearfully asked, "Are you real?" And I smiled and said, "Yes, love is still real." In that silence, in those soft sentences and warm chairs, I found that mercy isn't letting someone stay. It's standing firm in the grace you choose to extend and choosing not to invite destruction back inside. I breathed deeply and let the doors, and the story, settle into the night. The mornings by the sea arrive without warning, feral and luminous, like silver breath over glass. I have a small house now, not grand, but sunlit, perched where the waves feather pale against sand. I kept only the essentials: a wooden desk, an armchair that creaks like memory, and a pot of lavender I planted myself. The sea pours through my windows, and I let it in. Sometimes I imagine Edgar humming his off-key rhythm against the horizon. I've spent my days offering free legal workshops for women my age, the kind who raise families, taught schools, held communities, but aren't on any investor list. The library I created first now sits in quiet afternoons behind me. My small house by the sea is where I teach them how to read a contract, spot a scam, stand when the world wants them quiet. They call me their house lawyer. No fancy titles, but they listen. And that's enough. This morning I walked back inside after locking the workshop gate, notes from a seminar still fresh on the chalkboard behind me, when I noticed a new message icon blinking softly on my old tablet. It was a voicemail from a gentle voice, a gray-haired woman in the local community, holding those tears like polished lamps in memory. I clicked and listened. Elaine, I don't think I ever had a home that felt like home until now. My children moved so far. They forgot me. But you gave me a place again. Thank you. My heart lifted. I pressed lightly on the screen, as though pressing someone's hand, and whispered into the quiet, I finally built a home for hearts, not walls. I closed the message and set the tablet aside. Silence fell, not empty, but soft with peace. There's no more storm to repair, no locks to change. My greatest work has been done, not in legal filings or property transfers, but in creating a bridge where people lost could walk back to belonging. I stepped outside onto my porch, drawing in the salty air, a long, gentle breath that felt like release. The sea stretched before me, unchanged, patient, and full of stories. I thought of the library, the workshops, the women I've met who now carry a kind of quiet pride, not because I taught them, but because they found strength they thought was lost. I looked down at my notebook. A new page for tomorrow's lesson. I'll teach them how to stand on paper, how to claim what's theirs, because I know it's not just for me. It's for everyone who has ever been told they belong nowhere. In my pocket, I felt the edges of the old postcard, the one from Evelyn years ago, saying, "You raised me when no one else did." I pressed it flat, remembering her smile. She is gone, but her memory breathes in my actions. The sun's rays shift, and I see a single gull on the horizon. It flaps twice and drifts, free. I understand now that freedom isn't leaving behind. It's standing calmly, rooted in who you are, and letting those who have wandered find shelter there. I step back inside. On the wall where the old wedding picture once hung, I place the new art, a quote, hand-lettered in soft ink. When dignity returns to an elder, it echoes forever. I reach for my tablet, type with slow determination. Grandma True Stories. When an elder reclaims dignity, it echoes forever. I press post, because stories like mine belong not only in books or headlines, but everywhere someone needs to remember who they are.